Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Amber Data Derivatives podcast. I'm here with Terence An. He's the co-founder of EDOS Finance. Terence, how are you?
Yeah, I'm doing really well. Glad to be here.
Yeah, me too, absolutely. So, for those who don't know, EDOS is a DeFi protocol that allows you to hedge impermanent losses on AMMs. Before we jump into the protocol, I would just love to get a background of yourself and maybe how did you find your way into crypto and what were you doing before that?
Yeah. So before this, I was working at a trading firm, and before that, I was in college studying computer science and math. After that, went straight to Hudson River Trading, which is a HFT based out of New York. Was there for about 6 years, and kind of was just looking for something different to do. So my friend was running an on-chain trading fund, uh, mostly on the Solana blockchain. And back then, Solana still had these frequent outages, and so he had this
Oh, wow.
problem of like it goes down every few weeks and he's running a strategy. And by the time he comes back up, he has no idea if he's liquidated or not, right? Because
Whoa.
there's no way for him to respond in time. So he's like, can you help me figure out a way to manage this? And I was like, well, you clearly just need this principle of convexity, which we have in TradFi as options. And let's just look for where we can find it on chain. And he's like, I can't find it anywhere. How about we just build a protocol about this? He didn't want to build it with me. He, had his own thing going. So I went on it on my own and then eventually found a co-founder at a hackathon. And now that's what the EDOS Finance is about,
Wow.
convexity.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So that makes sense. You have some optionality that protects you with outages, and therefore, you're capping off your risk, and options are actually like insurance in that case. Now, is that what you were doing at Hudson River Trading? Were you working HFT in options or pure equities? And how did that role kind of evolve? Did they just throw you in right away, or was there kind of like a junior position that you worked up?
Yeah. So it's like a really flat hierarchy. I think in a lot of HFTs, it's a very flat hierarchy because it's very merit based. There's not really like titles separating people, but I started off on the equities desk, and that's kind of their bread and butter, the US Equities desk. Get to learn the system really well. I actually didn't trade options or any fancy derivatives there. It was more, I think, what HFT specializes in market microstructure. And so you start understanding like what it means to design a market well. Um, I can't say what like HRT did, but for example, there was like an Australian firm who understood that on a certain market, when you send in your packet, the very last bit of the packet tells you if it's a valid trade or not, right? There's a checksum at the end. And so one of the crazy things they did was we're going to start writing this packet the moment we get some information about the exchange, and that'll either do a trade that we might be interested in. But by the time we get to the very end of the packet, if our signals say we don't actually want to do this trade, we're going to mess up the checksum,
Hmm.
and now the trade doesn't go through, right? And so if you do this way, you get like a really sizable speed advantage over everyone else. And so you start thinking about markets in terms of this way, not just the financial engineering, but the technical engineering behind it. And I think that really lends itself to building in DeFi, where we're building, both sides of the equation.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And so, with your background in computer science, obviously that's perfect for being in HFT, and it's really good for building out in the crypto space. Now, the coding languages that you were using at Hudson River, I'm sure, are very different from the crypto space. Is there kind of a learning curve, or you have to relearn some stuff, or does it kind of help and lend itself really nicely to building in crypto?
Yeah, I think most HFTs work in Python for analytics and then C++ or some version of that for their actual trading or order execution side. So the solidity path of working in DeFi is really similar to C++. I think
Hmm.
like it's if you just actually it's really similar to C. So if you just don't do anything fancy in C++, it almost feels the same.
Oh, interesting. Well, that's great. And so so it sounds like for those who don't know, you guys are launching a testnet on September 15th. You guys are building on EVM L2s. So why did you guys choose essentially EVM L2s? And can you talk about what chains you guys are launching a testnet and sort of a little bit of that roadmap?
Yeah. EVMs, that's a great question. When it comes to building on EVMs, it's kind of like as a business decision, how to de-risk a startup. Because honestly, like the entire ecosystem of DeFi is just so wild. Like honestly, Solana looked like such an up and comer, and then it came down. Not to be harsh on Solana, I actually like them a lot as a blockchain, but some blockchains are just going to be more risky than others. And we were middle of actually building on Terra, you know,
Oh, whoa.
lo and behold, that whole mess. So we had built everything in Rust with the CosmWasm design. We knew the CosmWasm team really well, went back and forth on questions. And so the very first prototype was designed to be on Terra.
Hmm.
And when that all came down, we kind of learned our lesson as a business. All right, maybe we should do something that's been around for a little bit longer, kind of de-risk the whole situation.
That's
Yeah.
a Go ahead.
Uh, the other part of your question was about testnet and the other chains. And yeah, I just want to mention that our testnet is on Arbitrum Goerli, which seems pretty reliable. And then eventually we'll expand to Arbitrum mainnet, Avalanche mainnet, and Base mainnet.
That's fascinating. I want to touch on the base decision in a little bit, but the insight around sort of the de-risking by building on EVMs, that's a really interesting lesson. I learned this lesson way back when I first started investing in crypto. I was in Bitcoin, and then I discovered Ethereum, and I was like, oh man, Ethereum's better mousetrap. Like, how does not everyone just go into Ethereum? And that's when I learned a first mover advantage the hard way, meaning that Bitcoin still has the first mover advantage. But in the DeFi space, Ethereum in that way has the first mover advantage. And what I'm hearing from you is that as a builder in the space, you build on a wrong chain or an up and coming chain, you have a lot of risk outside of your control that this chain goes away or it never catches on. So might as well just build on a tried and true chain. Is that the right thinking?
Yeah, and it's not like Arbitrum is really tried and true. Maybe in the DeFi history it is just because it's so short. But it's more that building in Solidity on EVM means you can just switch over to any other EVM chain. Whereas if you're writing in Solana Rust, you're really stuck to Solana Rust.
Yeah, right. So the EVM is like Ethereum ecosystem, and all the side chains and layer twos are essentially very compatible. And if one fails, you can just move to the other one easily.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, Terrence, maybe you can give us a broad overview of Ethos Finance and what you guys do and what you guys offer and what you guys are building.
Yeah. At the highest level, it's honestly about reducing risks. Like we see ourselves more as a risk management platform. And so you can take any existing DeFi strategy, let's say perps, you can make a safer version of that, which is perp options. And by using convexity, we can make it into perp options. Maybe you're an AMM user, and if you're an LP or an AMM, you're earning yield, but that comes with a lot of risk, and people talk about it in terms of impermanent loss risk, right? So we can take literally that same thing and make a safer version where we hedge out that impermanent loss risk. We can even just take a naked token and make it into a safer version by kind of selling gamma around the current spot price and buying it back at a later price. Very TradFi structured products techniques, but it does de-risk the entire ecosystem. And if you look at the volatility distribution of just like crypto tokens, it's such a weird bimodal distribution that's like really missing the volatilities that we're used to, that we see de-risking as a really valuable step forward to onboarding more people into DeFi, where the risk appetite is something more normal, something that people are used to for their everyday usage.
Yeah, interesting. And then, so by when you're talking about altcoins and the bimodal distributions, you mean like it's in this one zone and it looks like a standard distribution, and then it jumps and now it's in this other zone that looks like a normal distribution. So you got like two humps side by side, and it kind of can quickly jump from one to the other.
Yeah, let me just hand wave it right now for you that on one side, if you look at annualized volatility, I think ETH has an annualized volatility of like 60%. And ETH and BTC are like the lowest ones. So from 40 to 60, you have the start of this hump that includes ETH, and then all the other tokens just give you this really fat tail going out super far in terms of volatility. And then on the other side, you have all these stables that basically have no volatility. Well, they might have higher volatility than you'd expect out of a dollar pegged asset, but it's still really, really low. So then you have these two sides, but like if you look at just US equities, they sit clearly in the middle of these two distributions. So what's funny is that the entire crypto ecosystem is missing the volatility profile that we're used to out of our risk assets.
Yeah, interesting. So you mean like the assets within the asset class, the altcoins being sort of the crazy fat tails, and then
Mhm.
Bitcoin and ETH less so, and then stables that have almost no volatility with the exception of depegging risk. And so
Yeah.
in stocks, stocks might have different volatilities, but they all sort of move this in the same way. Is that kind of what you're pointing out?
Yeah, stocks usually have an annualized volatility somewhere between like 20 to 40%, and DeFi is just literally everywhere else.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. So that's really interesting. So for those who don't know, impermanent loss is basically because AMMs have this constant product function. As you know, if you're an LP in ETH versus stable, as ETH goes down, you're essentially buying more and more ETH, and as ETH goes up, you're essentially selling more and more ETH, and so you kind of have this concave profile where you're not making as much as you could, and then your losses kind of compound to the downside. How does your protocol help with that? What are the mechanics? What do those look like?
Yeah, I like that you mentioned the concavity because, we're literally offering convexity, so they start canceling out with each other. I think you're getting at how does this protocol really work? And like you mentioned, when you are market making, automated market making, you are just putting down some assets and always trading into the asset that people want to sell to you, right? And collecting the trading fee. So you end up in the less valuable of the asset, and you're just relying on reduced volatility to bring you back to where the price originally was. Um, you can do the exact same operation, but the other way. So where now what I'm going to do is take some liquidity away from the AMM and say, if there is a trade that moves the price up, I will guarantee that I will also trade against you buying the asset that's appreciating.
Hmm.
So it's an automated trading strategy that rather than accumulating the token that is depreciating, you accumulate the token that is appreciating by constantly paying the trading fee.
Interesting. And how does that work? Is that like you guys have a separate pool that kind of manages this? Like how is this aspect managed?
Yeah, so I kind of described it in this type of synthetic trading where this opposing curve, the one with convexity, is synthetically trading against the one with concavity. Um, the way it really works when it implemented, because you have to be conscious of gas costs and all those things, is that it's still lumped into one pool where people can trade against. And we just do a lot of math and proper accounting to make sure that the two equations always cancel out and that there's no money missing anywhere. So when someone opens a position, it's really just a bunch of accounting to say, here's some liquidity. We're going to freeze that liquidity, trade it into either the one leg or the other based off of if you want more of a call type position or a put type position.
Mm-hmm.
And once it's frozen, we just start charging the fees that it would have accumulated had we not frozen that liquidity. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so can you touch on the fee part a little bit more? So the taker who wants essentially to have the convexity to offset their concavity, they essentially pay the fee that the LP would have earned if they were LPing, like the trading fees. How does that component work exactly?
Yeah, precisely that. We want to make sure that the LPer does not miss out on any trading fees they would have accumulated had they not had their liquidity borrowed. So I think a lot of other protocols that are in similar space make different decisions around this, and some of them just say, forget all the complexity. Let's just pick a rate and charge you that rate. And the problem with that is you start deviating from the market, and the market becomes less and less efficient. The nice part about AMMs is that they efficiently earn you something that is a function of realized volatility. And we don't really want to depart from that. So
Mhm.
users are used to accumulating fees based off of realized volatility. And as long as we do our accounting right to literally on every trade do another bookkeeping, we can have it so that takers pay exactly realized volatility plus a little bit of a time premium that we have to tack on so that, for the time value of the liquidity that you are borrowing.
That's interesting. So then you always kind of have like the realized volatility and then a little bit of variance in the options world, the variance risk premium, or a little bit of premium on top of the realized vol. So it kind of
Mhm.
mimics that option like pricing that we would see in vanilla options in TradFi and crypto vol. Is that right?
Yeah, we're getting more into the options description now, so that's great. I would call the borrow fees just clearly the time premium, and then the trading fee clearly constitutes the volatility premium. And if we want to get into it a little bit more, even technical, is that we're actually making a pretty big difference when it comes to the AMM aspect itself. So if you don't mind, we're going to step away from the option stuff, and I promise we'll come back. AMMs, if you compare them to central limit order books, central limit order books have a very dynamic spread, right? And that spread is based off of volatility, among other factors, but primarily volatility. So when it comes to an AMM, something like Uniswap, like the clear market leader, they have a fixed spread. They have 3 fixed spreads. You can do, I think, like 5 bips, 30 bips, and I forget the last one. But the point is, it is fixed, and you don't really reallocate between those pools. So during really high market volatility, if you're stuck in the 5 bips pool, you're just getting run over, right? The market is like, oh, I'm glad you're trading against me with no spread. Whereas you go to a centralized limit order book, they're like, no, you have to pay us 1 whole percent just to cross because everything is collapsing. That's how markets should behave. And so when we make an AMM, we also have to think about how do we make that behavior true of the AMM we are designing. And the way to do that is with dynamic fees. And so to get into the technicals a little bit, we have these 2 curves, right? Going back to that, the amount of demand on one curve relative to the other at a given price implies a certain volatility surface. And so you use that implied volatility surface to dictate what the swapping fee is at that price. And that's the really big jump, because now we have not only a more efficient options market, we also have a more efficient Delta One market where we just say, yeah, this fee is dynamically adjusted according to implied volatility. And, this gives a more fair rate to our liquidity providers.
I see. So as more and more people want to take the convexity paying side of your protocol, the implicit fee that they pay goes up and up and up, and essentially, therefore, it kind of mimics like an increased demand of volatility.
Yes, exactly. And thus a wider spread.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's really, really interesting. And so, can you talk a little bit about sort of your protocol, your team? So did you guys raise any money to build this out? How long have you guys been building? And after the testnet launch in mid-September, September 15th, what are the following sort of roadmap items?
Yeah, so we're a team of 6 people right now. There's 4 builders. My co-founder has been in DeFi for a really long time. He previously launched an Honey NFT lending protocol, but he decided to step away from that team for other reasons. And I was like, fantastic. You are exactly the person I want to work with. And then we have 2 other people who come from more traditional tech backgrounds. And we have 1 person in charge of marketing and 1 person in charge of content creation. The usual DeFi startup mix right there. You mentioned our roadmap. So the roadmap going forward is we have our testnet. Once that goes well, we go through audits, we have our mainnet, and on the mainnet platform, you'll be able to, 1, monitor your positions, because honestly, I don't know, you've probably been in DeFi a while. You know that a lot of us still do our tracking on just like Excel spreadsheets. And that's kind of ridiculous, right? I want my interactive brokers experience. And so not only did we build this AMM, we're launching this kind of portfolio management system so you can view and get a lot of transparency on your risks and your historical performance. That comes with mainnet. Post that, this portfolio management system lets you cross margin across so many different positions that it lets us build all these more interesting structured products, which is really what we were going for. So the first one is a non-liquidating money market where, the concept is really simple. You borrow and lend, and you use an option to hedge out that exposure, so you never get liquidated in the borrow lending, which was the original use case my friend notified me about, where this whole EOS thing got started. After that, we can do Oracle-free perpetuals, and then after that, we can dive into even more complex things like self-paying insurance, really high, like ultra short-term finance, where you lever up your LP positions, because now that they're hedged, anything that's hedged, you can start levering up with more safety, right? So, doing LPs, concentrated LPs that already have 40% APRs with 10 times the leverage, it gets into some pretty insane numbers. And it's more on the gamified side. But yeah, the roadmap is super long, really delves into the structured product aspect.
That's fantastic. And I'll link some links to your website, your Twitter. You guys also have a Medium blog. Can you just maybe just chat or just point for listeners, point to your website and your Twitter, and I think you guys have a Discord as well, and any other media.
Yeah, so go to our website, www.itos.fi, etos.fi. There you can find connections to all of our other media channels. But if you just want to go into on Twitter, it's at etos_fi.
Fantastic. And then, Terence, I like to end the podcast with a little bit more personal questions. So what I usually ask is, what do you like to do outside of work? So when you're not building the protocol, and then do you have any favorite books that you recommend to listeners?
Yeah, the last time I could spend time on hobbies was a while ago, so I have to recall. But before this, I was really into Muay Thai for a bit.
Oh,
I
nice.
just did it very amateurishly, but it was a lot of fun, cycling, just a pretty active guy. In terms of books, I would highly recommend Demon of Our Own Design. I think he takes it's a book about all the financial collapses that have really happened in the past 40 years. Does a really great job starting from the Japanese warrants mess all the way up to the great financial crisis. And he was head of a risk management desk. And so you get all the insights of what he was thinking about. Here are all the idiosyncratic ways that risk can creep into your fund without you even realizing it. And he just gives such a brilliant description of the billion-dollar messes that just fall onto his shoulders. I get goosebumps every time I think about it.
Whoa. It's called Demons of
Yeah.
Our Own Design?
A demon of our own design, and saying how the financial setup, the entire scheme is kind of we designed it for a certain purpose, and we don't realize that we are now slaves to this beast. And
Whoa.
yeah,
That
it's
sounds like a great book.
he takes some liberties about I don't know if everything there is exactly true. Maybe he hyperbolizes a little bit, but fantastic read.
That is awesome. Well, Terence, thank you so much. We're going to look forward to your testnet launch, and I appreciate you coming on a podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Greg, for having me, and great questions.
Awesome. See you next time.